Shalom. Welcome to day 4 of the Feast of Tabernacles, or Sukkot, here at Ferncliff State Park, just near Goreville, Illinois. My name is Bob Farr, and I'm bringing a message today. It's called the Sabbath Day. We had one of the former ladies that attended our assembly ask me to do a message on the Sabbath. And I have a lot of people ask me questions about why I keep the Sabbath instead of Sunday, and hopefully through this message I'll make it plain where everyone can understand why we all should keep the seventh-day Sabbath and not Sunday. Let's go to Yahuwah in prayer before we get started. Almighty Father Yahuwah, we thank you for this Feast of Tabernacles and for all the things that have happened and the blessings that we've had. And we thank you for this message that you've given me. Father, help me to communicate it. Help it to be your words and not mine. And Father, lead us in the direction you'd have us to go. We ask it all in your precious Son, Yahushua's name. Amen. Okay, a good place to start is in the beginning. We're going to start in Genesis chapter 2 and just read 3 verses. Genesis 2, verse 1 through 3. Obviously, in Genesis chapter 1, God created the heavens and the earth and everything that was in them. And everything that's in the heaven and everything that's on the earth beneath. Chapter 2 starts out and says, "Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the 7th day, Elohim ended his work which he had made, and he rested on the 7th day from all his work which he had made. And Elohim blessed the 7th day and sanctified it," or set it apart, made it different and special from all the others, because that in it he had rested from all his work which Elohim had created and made. So that's the first Sabbath. God created the earth in 6 days. On the 7th day he rested. So let's go to Exodus 20 now and read that. Exodus chapter 20. And we'll see a little bit more about the Sabbath. And obviously here, these are the Ten Commandments on chapter 20. And the 4th commandment says, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shall you labor and do all your work. But the 7th day is the Sabbath of Yahuwah your Elohim. In it you shall not do any work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your manservant, nor your maidservant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger that is within your gates. For in 6 days Yahuwah made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested the 7th day. Wherefore Yahuwah blessed the Sabbath and day and hallowed it," again, or set it apart, or made difference between it. So that's the 4th commandment. And I don't believe that any one of these commandments are done away with. Covered that in yesterday's message. Yahushua said that not one jot nor one tittle should pass from the law or the Torah until all be fulfilled. And obviously everything's not yet been fulfilled. But now let's read in Isaiah 66:23. Isaiah chapter 66, verse 23. And this is a prophecy of not only the millennium, but obviously of the future after Isaiah's time. Isaiah 66. This is right at the end of 66, verse 23. 66 and 23. And it said, "And it shall come to pass," obviously prophesying, "that from one new moon to another, and from one Sabbath to another, shall all flesh come to worship before me, saith Yahuwah." So that's prophecy of the future. Isaiah is calling right there. Now let's go to Ezekiel chapter 46, which is the millennial reign of the 1,000-year reign of Yahushua, the Messiah. And let's see what's going on with the Sabbath day in Ezekiel. Ezekiel chapter 46. Ezekiel chapter 46, verse 1. Thus saith Yahuwah Elohim, the gate of the inner court that looketh toward the east shall be shut the 6 working days. Again, this is prophesying towards the millennium. But on the Sabbath it shall be opened, and in the day of the new moon it shall be opened. And the prince shall enter in by the way of the porch of the gate without, and shall stand by the post of the gate. And the priest shall prepare his burnt offering and his peace offerings, and he shall worship at the threshold of the gate. Then he shall go forth, but the gate shall not be shut until the evening, because Sabbath starts on sundown Friday night and ends on sundown on Saturday night. So that Sabbath day, it wouldn't be shut until the going down of the sun, and that would be the end of that Sabbath day. Likewise, the people of the land shall worship at the door of this gate before Yahuwah in the Sabbaths and in the new moons. Now, that's prophesying there. Now let's go and see when Yahushua the Messiah, if he kept Saturday or if he kept Sunday. Let's turn to Luke chapter 4. Luke chapter 4. Excuse me. Luke chapter 4. Verse 31. Then Yahushua went to Capernaum, at a town in Galilee. Then Yahushua went to Capernaum, a town in Galilee, and taught there in the synagogue every Sabbath day. Okay? So, obviously, Yahushua, the Messiah, kept the Sabbath day. Not only did he rest on the Sabbath, even though many accused him of breaking it, what he broke was the Talmudic teachings that were brought along with the Sabbath, because he never did one thing that was contrary to the Torah or those first 5 books of the Bible. So now let's go to Acts chapter 18 and look at when Paul, the Apostle Paul, what he did, which day he kept, whether Saturday, the 7th-day Sabbath, or Sunday. Acts, what did I say? Acts chapter 18. Verse 4. Well, I'm going to start in verse 1. It says, after these things, Paul departed from Athens and came to Corinth, and found a certain Jew named Aquila, born in Pontus, lately come from Italy, with his wife Priscilla, because that Claudius had commanded all Jews to depart from Rome, and came into them, and because he was of the same craft, or skill, obviously Paul was, they said, was a tent maker, he abode with them and wrought, for by their occupation they were tent makers. And he reasoned in the synagogue, Paul, reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath, and persuaded the Jews and the Greeks. So it wasn't just the Jews meeting on the Sabbath day, but also the Greeks. So now, some say that the Sabbath is changed to Sunday, and they said that because they said Messiah rose on the first day of the week. But let's go into, and the King James and most translations render this the first day of the week. But let's go back and read it in the green interlinear with the strong concordance reference numbers. That's what it looks like. And this has got the actual Greek in here, and then obviously the translation to English. Let's first go to Matthew chapter 28, verse 1, which is right at the end of Matthew. Matthew 28, verse 1. Now, the King James reads completely different, which I'm not going to read that at this moment. Let's read it. It says, in the interlinear, it says, after the Sabbaths, plural. Well, what are they talking about? Well, they're talking about the first day of unleavened bread, which would have been on a Thursday. He was offered on the 14th day, which at that day would have been on a Wednesday. He died on a Wednesday, was in the tomb Wednesday night, Thursday night, and Friday night. Okay? That was the 3 nights. He was in there Thursday, Friday, and all day on Sabbath. Okay? So after the Sabbath, that's the 2 Sabbaths they're talking about, at the dawning into the first of the Sabbaths, plural, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to the grave. Okay, we don't have to read the rest of that. What they are talking about on the first of the Sabbaths is what's found in Leviticus chapter 23. Let me read that really quick. It starts in verse 10. Leviticus chapter 23. Because this is very important to understand why this is the first of the Sabbaths and not the first day of the week. Leviticus 23. Because this is where most people don't understand why they translate that. And you'll see. Obviously, he rose right at the end of the Sabbath, right at the beginning of the first day of the week, which would have been Sunday. But it was talking about the wave sheaf, or the first of the Sabbaths, the Feast of First Fruits, or the wave sheaf offering, mentioned in Leviticus chapter 23, verse 10. It says, "Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, when you be come into the land which I give unto you, and shall reap the harvest thereof, then you shall bring a sheaf, or a handful, of the first fruits of the barley harvest." I'm adding that, but that's what they were having. They would bring just a handful that was green ears, that what's Abib means green ears, so that they could see that this was the beginning of the first month of the new year. So it says, "I give unto you, you shall bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest unto the priest, and he shall wave the sheaf before Yahuwah to be accepted for you on the morrow after the Sabbath. The priest shall wave it." And this represents our Messiah, Yahushua, being the first of the first fruits, being offered for us. As you notice, it said, "And he shall wave the sheaf before Yahuwah to be accepted for you on your behalf on the morrow after the 7th day Sabbath." I added, but it is the Sabbath. "The priest shall wave it. And you shall offer that day when you wave the sheaf an he lamb without blemish the first year for a burnt offering for Yahuwah. And the meat offering thereof shall be 2/10 deal of fine flour mingled with oil, an offering made by fire unto the Lord for a sweet savor, and a drink offering thereof shall be of wine the 4th part of a hin. And you shall eat neither bread, nor parched corn, or dried grain, nor green ears, until the selfsame day that you have brought an offering unto Elohim. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations and all your dwellings. And you shall count unto you from the morrow after the 7th day Sabbath," I added 7th day to that, "from the day that you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, 7 Sabbaths shall be complete." And then the 50th day is the day of Pentecost. Okay? So this day in Matthew 28, this first of the Sabbath, is talking about the wave sheaf. Okay? It's not because it's Sunday. It is Sunday, but that has nothing to do with why. Okay? So obviously it doesn't change us to keeping the first day of the week. Now, let's go to, for another witness of this, let's go to Mark chapter 16. Mark chapter 16. We're going to read in verse 1. "And the Sabbath passing," so it's talking about right at the end of the Sabbath, Mary Magdalene, I think this is right. Okay. Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so that coming they might anoint him. And very early on the first of the Sabbath, and that Strong's Concordance number there for Sabbath is 4521. It was the same in Matthew 28. You can check that for yourself. Don't take my word for anything. That's how you get misled. And very early on the first of the Sabbaths, the sun rising, they came upon the tomb, and they said to themselves, "Who will roll away the stone from the door of the tomb for us?" And looking up, they saw that the stone had been rolled back. So it had already been moved, and they were right there when the sun was coming up, for it was very large, and entered into the tomb. We don't need to read it all. You get my gist on that. 45:21 is the Strong's Concordance reference number for that. Let's go to Luke now for another witness. Luke 24:1. And it's basically the same thing as Matthew 28:1, but it's the end of Luke, the Gospel of Luke. Luke, what did I say? 24. Right at the end. 24:1. I already went too far. 24:1. But on the end of the Sabbath, while still very early, they came on the tomb carrying spices which they prepared, and some were with them. And they found the stone having been rolled away from the tomb. And going in, they did not find the body of Master Yahushua. And it happened, as they were perplexed about this, even behold, two men in shining clothing stood by them. And they, being terrified, 24:1. But on the indeed Sabbath, while it was still very early, obviously, indeed Sabbath they're talking about is the first day of the Feast of Weeks, like we had just talked about. Sorry about the interruption. A dog came by, which caused my dogs to lose their mind. Sorry about that. Now let's go to Acts chapter 20. This has nothing to do with Messiah, but this is another place where in the King James Bible it translates the first day of the week. And my point in this is there is nothing in the scriptures about Sunday. Not one thing translated in the Bible should have been translated the first day of the week. It should have been translated the first of the Sabbaths. Again, don't trust me on that. Look it up for yourself. Let's go to Acts chapter 20. Acts 20. Just one of them days. Everything that can go wrong will go wrong. You ever have a day like that? Bet you have. Acts chapter 20. If I can get there. Okay, Acts 20, verse 7. This is a place where they like to go and talk about the first day of the week. So let's look at 20 and verse 7. Well, I went by it. Okay, finally found it. And 20 says in this Green's Interlinear, and on the first of the Sabbath, the disciples assembling to break bread, being about to depart on the morrow, Paul reasoned with them, and he continued in his speech till after midnight. And most people say, well, see, they're together here on Sunday. Again, it was a Sunday, but the reason for their gathering wasn't because it was Sunday. It's because it was the wave sheaf or the first fruits where they were coming to give their offering. And Paul spoke here before departing. So now one more witness on that. 1 Corinthians chapter 16. Another place that people like to go to tout that that it's a Sunday that they're talking about. Let's read it. And again, this is available online at christianbookstores.com, and I think this is probably about $15, somewhere in that neighborhood. So it's available to everybody. Get this Green's Interlinear. It's volume 4 of the New Testament, and it's got all the Strong's concordance numbers in it to prove or disprove what I'm saying here today. So 1 Corinthians, 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verse 1 and 2 is all we're going to read. Okay? And about the collection of the saints. So again, they were making a collection. There's a dearth in Jerusalem, and they're making a collection, and they're taking the money from Galatia to Jerusalem. It says, and about the collection for the saints, as I charged the churches of Galatia, so also you do. So in other words, the church at Corinth. On the first of the week, it says in the sidebar. But when you read in the Greek, it says on the first of the Sabbaths, 45:21. You can look it up, look in the Greek over here, and you'll see 45:21. So again, on the first of the Sabbaths, let each of you put by himself, storing up whatever he is prospered, that there not be then collections when I come. So again, they were going to take up this offering on the first day of first fruits. And when he came, he said there'd be no gatherings or collections when he came. So notice there that they, even in this book, they manipulated it. But you can see it plainly in the Greek. 45:21 is where, and under it, it says of first of the week. Okay? So now that we've seen that, we can see no evidence that anybody in the New Testament or the Old Testament was keeping any other day than the seventh day Sabbath, which now we call Saturday. Okay? Saturday's a pagan name, but it used to be the first day, the second day, the third day, the fourth day, the fifth day, the sixth day, and then the Sabbath day. They called Friday the preparation day, and the seventh day was called the Sabbath. Let's get one more witness now before we end. Let's go to Hebrews chapter 4, verse 1, because this, to me, takes it, and just makes it totally, years and years ago when I was I was a Baptist minister, I was reading this. I was an understudy to a doctorate in theology from Baylor University. And they had challenged us all to read the entire Bible starting from Genesis to Revelation. And I took it real seriously, and I did that. And when I got to this, after reading all of the Old Testament and then into the New, I knew there was something definitely wrong, just really wasn't sure at that time in my life what it was. Let's go to Hebrews chapter 4, and let me expound on this. Wait a minute, let me do, I can read it in here, it doesn't matter, but I'm going to use the King James simply because you all have a King James. Let's turn to Hebrews chapter 4. It's easy to find in my Bible because I got a page coming out right there. So I'm going to finish up right here, and we're going to read through verse 11. Okay? It says, "Let us therefore fear, lest a promise being left us of entering into his rest," obviously his is Yahuwah's, "any of you should seem to come short of it." Now, remember, this is book of Hebrews. This is the New Testament. And this was a homily or a sermon to the Hebrews, actually to stop offering sacrifices in the temple. That was its purpose. Obviously, they didn't do that, but they also didn't keep the Sabbath mixed with faith like they should have. But so get that when we're reading it. "Let us therefore fear, lest a promise being left us of entering into his rest," Yahuwah's, "and any of you should seem to come short of it. For unto us was the gospel preached," and it has been. It was preached to the disciples, and I believe Paul or Shaul would have been the Hebrew translation of his name, was the author of this book of Hebrews, and he had the gospel preached to him as well as unto them. That's talking about them that wandered in the wilderness. "But the word preached did not profit them that walked in the wilderness, wandered in the wilderness, not being mixed with faith in them that heard it. For we which have believed do enter into rest." And this word rest here is 45:21, Sabbath. So they're using rest here where it says Sabbath. "As he saith, as I have sworn in my wrath, if they shall enter into my rest, although the works were finished from the foundation of the world." You remember when I read in Genesis chapter 2, said it was finished? Well, it was finished. After 6 days, he rested. And then after 6 more days, he rested. And that's been going on ever since then, even to this day. "For he spake in a certain place of the 7th day on this wise, and Elohim did rest the 7th day from all his works." And in this place again, Wherever you are, in this place again, if they shall enter into my rest, quote from Psalms 95:11, seeing therefore it remains that some must enter therein, and they to whom it was first preached entered not in because of unbelief. See, even if they kept the proper day, if they didn't trust God, it wouldn't be counted to them as righteousness. Okay? And he says in verse 7, and again, he limits a certain day, saying in David, or through David, as he was prophesying, today, after so long a time, as it is said, today, if you will hear his voice, harden not your hearts. And I'm telling you right now, harden not your hearts. Listen to the scripture. Don't listen to your pastor if he's telling you the seventh-day Sabbath has been changed to Sunday, because there's not one verse of scripture that support that other than their doctrines. So, verse 8. Now listen to this very carefully. For if Jesus had given them rest or another day, then would he have not afterward have spoken of another day? When I read this opened my eyes to realize that the Sabbath day probably at that time wasn't done away with. He says in verse 9, there remains therefore a rest to the people of Elohim. For he that is entered into his rest, he also has ceased from his own works as Elohim did from his. Now I've heard people say, oh well, we rest in Jesus, so we rest every day. Well, my question for them is, what day do you work? Because verse 10 says, for he that is entered into his rest, he also has ceased from his own works, as Elohim did from his. Let us labor, therefore, to enter into that rest, 45:21, lest any man fall after the same example of unbelief. And I challenge anybody, and the challenge is already out there. I'm not tying any financial thing to it, but if any of you people that keep Sunday out there want to try to prove me wrong, I challenge you to bring one verse of scripture, one verse that says that the seventh-day Sabbath was changed in any way to any other day of the week other than the Sabbath. May God bless and keep you.